My name's Lori H. Schwartz. I've been hosting this room, and I've been hearing such great conversations about a number of technology and storytelling trends that are really about what this summit is about. And I thought it would be great if we got together a couple of people that have a variety of different roles in our ecosystem and are really experiencing all of these different trends, and hear from them both from your business hats, but also from your personal worlds, what really is keeping you up at night. On an exciting level, too, because it's funny, Christina and I were debating. I was like, is it too negative to say what's keeping you up at night? Because, sometimes you're just up at night for good reasons, too. I mean, forget it, I don't mean to go down that path, but you know what I'm saying. I realized what I was saying as I don't know, I was looking at you. I don't know you, but anyway. I know. But what I'd like to do first is just go down the row so they can share what their roles are professionally, so you start to get the perspective of that, and then we're going to talk about different trends. So let's start with you, Simon. And Simon's one of our hosts at this great production summit, so thank you for doing that. This is such a great event every year.
You're very welcome. My role, where to start? Fortunately, today started for me at like 9 o'clock. That's unusual. Let me tell you that most of my days start between 6 and 7 a.m. with meetings every day at that time, and go for 12, 13, 14 hours without breaks. That's just the nature of our work. So I'm at Microsoft. I've been there for coming up on 3 years. I was at Disney and other places before that. It says there that I'm the strategy director, which is one of my roles for sure, but I really run M&E for Microsoft. So that really is a lot of different hats, between making technology decisions, determining how we work with different customers, what solutions we're going to offer to people, connecting in with our different sales teams and all of our customers around the world. I'm also a thought leader. I talk to Satya probably once or twice a month in terms of where we're going from a media standpoint. How do we think about AI, different elements of video production, and the entire landscape. I also have to understand the market. So everything from how big it is, how much people spend, what are the trends that we're talking about today, but also really to be part of the community more than anything else, right? And so as much as I love Microsoft and all those things and things that we push, I love the space, right? We're passionate about it. That's what we're here. And so every day, right, I think about what we can do from a content perspective. How do we make it better, richer, more engaging for people to engage in great content? And my kids they love stuff, but for sure, I love movies, and they don't watch long movies anymore. So that's a hard part for me. So it's just like the transition that I'm seeing around our industry too. So that's a little bit about me. It's great to be here. You can ask me any question. I'm ready for anything. So
you're going to regret that. All right. All right, Josh.
Hey, with Christina up here, watch out. So it's
no,
but great to meet everybody. Josh Furlow. I'm the chief executive with Monolith Studios. A little bit about who I am, where I came from, being in the production space for pretty much my entire career. But from a Monolith standpoint, came in originally as a part of a seed investment team, where I was not intending to 3 years later wake up every single day, every single morning, every single night, looking at the emerging tech trends within virtual production for the live entertainment space, for the virtual production space, what's the experiential space. But I've always been a production junkie. I've lived and breathed on the road for a better part of 30 years. Former AEG executive on the live touring business. Switched into a private equity role as we bought and sold media companies for a better part of 12 years, and swore to myself and my family I would never do it again, and I'm doing it again. So, I'm a deal junkie. I'm an M&A guy. I am a passionate lifestyle of a production, but depend on the teams working with me as the true kind of tech stack and tech heads. So I don't claim to be the expert of what's the next revolution or evolution of technology, but the amount of time we spend in it, very similar to what Simon was saying, to know the space, 15, 20 hours a day, we're reading, we're absorbing, and we're physically on set or living that space. So It's great to be here with new friends and colleagues and current friends and colleagues to just to hear about more about what we all see, but how we can challenge the rest of the industry for not only standardization, but how do we take gambles together rather than this block and tackle of, oh, it's my world, not yours. So.
I like that. That's a beautiful message, Josh. Christina?
Hey everyone, Christina Lee Storm. I'm founder and CEO of AsherXR. I basically how I define myself is a producer and an executive, really working and have been working for a while at the cross section of storytelling and technology. So my background comes from traditional narrative fare, film, television, everything from development, like beginning of the concept of a story. So I worked in development, also production, got burnout on production. We're at a production summit. And that's when I kind of turned my eyes towards visual effects, which is kind of funny. Worked at Rhythm and Hughes, took the company through bankruptcy, did a little film called Life After Pi, and then made my way got recruited to go work over at DreamWorks Animation. Similar pipelines, but different. And then left there. When I was there, I was both in production for film and then also ended up running the advanced creative technology team, which was great. And that's where we used every tool that wasn't being used on the main pipeline. And we were really pushing on real time as well as motion capture, virtual cameras, that whole bit. Ended up in a very short period of time doing different kind of immersive experiences, VR, AR, on all our franchises, as well as live. So there were some really great projects there. Left there, ended up going back into features as producing there's a trend here, and I don't mean to worry you all. I ended up producing at Bronze Studio, which is also sadly bankrupt. And so I got my eyes out. And then I ended up going over to Netflix.
She's not bankrupt.
Not bankrupt, no.
Or do we really know? We don't-
No comment. Virtual production, ended up being director of virtual production. My team, I wore a lot of hats, and this is where I got to work with Josh and his team with Monolith. But we help build up stages and ecosystems and spaces for our creatives to sort of play and also work in virtual production. I'm not just speaking of like the on-set stuff, but everything in pre-visualization, world building. And then we also eventually migrated over to working with production. And really my team's task was to look at projects, dissect scripts, see what might make sense for the small fare all the way to bigger, tier one, most complex titles, and recently left. So I'm super excited because now stepping back, and we'll get into it, things that keep me up at night are the positive things. The possibilities are really starting to become more and more clear. And that's why I'm excited that I get to connect the dots as a consultant right now. I'm connecting the dots for a lot of different companies and looking at how for me, I tend to be a little bit of the futurist, so I kind of see 5 to 10 out. But then I also, because I come from producer, how do you execute it today for the studios, for content? So I kind of wear both hats. Excited about this conversation.
Rachel?
It's great to be here today. I'm Rachel Joy Victor. It's a little intimidating to go after like such a great group of people. I think to your point, Christina, like working at the intersection of storytelling and emerging tech, you kind of accept that 50% of the companies you work for are going to like shut down while you're working there for some reason or the other. But I come from a background academically of computational neuroscience, spatial economics. So for me, I'm always thinking kind of the database picture behind storytelling, and that's kind of a through line through a lot of my work. But the other through line is thinking about world building and the role of designing, from the neuroscience side for the individual and for the individual experience as they relate to story worlds, as they relate to immersive media, but also what are the affordances of the story world that we put in front of them? What are the affordances of the virtual worlds that they interact with? So my work as a consultant usually ends up being, yes, let's design the story world, let's design the narrative and the experience design, but how are we really thinking about building cohesive, persistent, and responsive experiences? And there are a lot of pieces of that puzzle, like the strategy piece of like what consumer segments are you targeting, how are you targeting them across platforms, the UX piece of like functionally, what's the handoffs between those different platforms, and then the production piece of like, is our model for production really aligning with the type of story and type of engagement we're looking at? So I work independently as a consultant, and then more recently, I'm the co-founder of Fabric AI, which is connecting AI startups with corporate sponsors to solve for specific needs within content creation workflows.
Fantastic. All right, these guys are very impressive. So I want to start sort of backwards, kind of more on the C side of the B2B2C, because I work mostly with B2B events and companies, but it's the C that ultimately we're all ending up with. And you mentioned your kids, and you also mentioned sort of world building and audience experience. So I'd love to hear from each of you and treat this almost like it's a you're giving me like a little thing for Twitter or X or whatever, just like a couple of lines, just so we really hear from you. But tell me, Simon, when you think about the audiences that are coming, what are you thinking about? What do you think they want or are going to be like? And you mentioned your kids are absorbing more shorter form content. So give us some of those thoughts on that.
I was hoping you weren't going to come to me first. I think for sure, there's no doubt that the different experiences that we all have with content have fundamentally changed, right? I like to say that platforms tend to be the new operating system or operating model for media companies these days, right? In terms of how we engage. But everybody in this room has an expectation of how they want to engage with content, right? That is fundamentally true. And there has never been more of a time when that is more possible, right, in terms of how we put it together. But there are still challenges with all of that, right? So I see gaming as a really interesting entry point, right, where audiences, platforms want to get those audiences even younger, right? They want those people on their platform as quickly as they possibly can get them. The attention span of my kids is really short, right? And so if they make something that's super long, and it's not new, then they don't stay with it, and you can kind of tell that they're not engaged with it, right, in a certain way. For me, right, I want the experience. I was blown away when I saw Oppenheimer the other day, just fundamentally just blown away. I was like I hadn't been to a show in IMAX where the sound and the visuals were so amazing, right? I was like, this is a totally different perspective, right? And so I think there's just a lot going on in terms of how people engage, right? In terms of the platforms that they're on. Data drives a lot of that, right? Where I talked about it before in my keynote, right? Where how much data is underutilized in terms of figuring out what those platforms should have, and how they should define those experiences. That doesn't happen enough today. And you're seeing platforms pay the price for it, right? To some degree. And also the different types of content they're putting on there. So for me, I'm not sure if I'm technically answering your question, but I would just say there are now more opportunities and more expectations around personalization. But it can also go too far the other way, right? Where it becomes technically creepy, right? Where you've known too much about it. I don't know if anyone's supposed to talk about that, but.
No, I mean, I keep going.
No,
Sorry,
no,
I
no.
was gonna.
And you're also wearing pink, and I want to acknowledge that for me, the Barbie screening I went to was an experience, a consumer experience. It was a shared pinkathon.
Yes,
And all the women in the audience were clapping and crying. And so
and
to
it's
me-
gonna hit all of the
Yeah.
points of entertainment. And this summer, posts coming out of Netflix, a lot of people are asking, "What are you thinking about? What are you thinking about? What do you think?" And I think because, and Laura, we've talked about this. We're at this really interesting historical time of disruption, more than ever. Like we always say that every
It's
2
true.
years, but it's really true because of how production right now is stalled out. So for me this summer, I've really been thinking about the umbrella. I call it the umbrella of entertainment. And And it's exactly to your point, Simon. It's like my kids, teens, their view of entertainment is much more vast. And so I think we have to, as people in this industry, need to ask ourselves, how are we defining entertainment? What does entertainment mean to us? Because growing up, depending on what generation you're in, boomer, Gen X, pre-internet, then you go, millennial, they're still hybrid, and then you go Gen Z, which my kids are Gen Z, and it's not one or the other. It's not a zero-sum game. And so I think we do in the first step of like looking at the future, it's really how are you defining entertainment, and are you creating barriers for your audience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to add one more thing before you go, Josh, which I think when we talk at Microsoft a little bit, we talk about the fact that if you think in the relatively short space of time that's happened over the last 20 plus years, right, so much has changed. We went from having a very one-to-many type interaction, right? So it was just blasting it out, to now this one-to-one expectation, right? Everything is unique to me, where I am, what I like. I mean, that's amazing. And sometimes I have to sit back and think that's a really short amount of time for that kind of immense amount of change to happen, right? And for us to absorb that through technology is also really hard. So I don't know if Josh or Rachel want to chime on that, but it's...
No, and it's the immediate like need or want, like thinking of all of our kids' experience, but it's also our own experience. 20 plus years ago, we didn't have the ability to scroll. We didn't have the ability to go from a digital to a live experience. But it all comes back to, no matter what form you're ingesting that content or that entertainment from, you're looking for an experience, and you're looking for an emotional reaction or emotional attachment to how you're consuming that. Whether you're my 5-year-old son who was hearing all the stuff via the YouTube channels on what this Barbie meant, and we went and saw Barbie. He's like, this is a wild experience. Let me go see it. To then saying, okay, what's the next live experience that we can all be in a mass gathering with, to absorb that visual content. So I think it doesn't really matter, like from my personal standpoint, it's the instant gratification of what people want now, but how can you lock that experience, and how can you lock the emotion, which can be driven by the data, can be driven by the production of the producer, but ultimately it's all of our responsibilities to drive it effectively, and then efficiently it's going to be a faster consumption any way you look at it.
Now, I want to throw a question at you, because this will help also answer the one I just asked. But you always are labeled as a world builder, okay? How many of you hear that expression a lot, world builder? Okay, like a couple of years ago, did you ever hear world builder, right? It's a thing. Now, how many of you have, maybe watched a favorite show of yours, and then you saw somebody complaining about their breaking canyon by doing that? How many of you hear that kind of regular? Okay, maybe I'm the bigger nerd here. All right. My larger point is that I think audiences are really involved with story right now and world building. So can you talk, you start with what does world building mean to you? And it's so tech-based right now, so that's how it fits into what we're talking about, but go ahead.
Okay, so there's so many pieces to this. Where to start? I think at one fundamental level, when people think about world building, it's coming from like a gaming standpoint of, let's design the lore of this world, or like high fantasy. What are all the rules of this world and how it operates, the history over time, and then how is it brought to life spatially? So I think those are some pieces of world building. But I think going beyond that, world building is also the story world in general. What is the canvas that supports the ability to create content across a comic book, there's a film, there's a TV show, there's a VR experience, each of those being part of a cohesive unit where everything kind of falls within, the canon of the story that you're telling. There's also an additional piece, I think, of world building that we're seeing with new kind of emerging content formats of world building that supports responsiveness of experience. So if you're building virtual worlds, what are the assets and pieces of that world? What is the kind of behaviors that are encoded within those objects? What is the behavior that's encoded within individuals as they interact with those objects? And how are those things, as they interact with each other, leading to emergent experience that are customized to that player or that individual. And just to quickly circle back to the previous question, I think the context piece is really important when we're designing these experiences, like you said, Simon. I think there are almost like two layers of context that we're designing for when we're thinking of narrative nowadays. One is the out of world engagement, right? The fan experience, everyone else on TikTok is talking about Barbie and doing Barbenheimer. I'm going to be a part of that. Or I feel connected to this Harry Potter house or this Percy Jackson cabin. That external identification with the story world. And then there's the additional layer of in-world engagement of how am I relating to the story world as maybe a participant now in the world that's enabled through an app experience or a VR experience. And each of those has, unique ways of how we're framing the data around it, right? On the outworld side, you're looking more at consumer data and how people might want to invest and spend their money in relation to the world. And then within the world, you're actually looking for how do they want to progress as a character with relation to this world. And there's really this ability to kind of grow with the world, which is a whole new format falling under that umbrella of content.
Yeah.
No, I think everyone gets, trapped into a building, but it's your own interpretation of it. So, but how we look at it, whether it's from the Monolith standpoint or a sister company of ours that is creating those physical worlds for a commerce play, for a delivery of content play, for an experience play, of what that ultimately means. But it's just like, it goes, like I said, it goes back to that either brand or a personal experience of what and how you interpret it.
I will only add that it's amazing. I mean, I'm just sitting here thinking my first word is gaming, right? If I'm honest, right? I mean, I'm sitting there thinking intersection between studios or broadcasting and gaming is so like dependent on each other right now, right? And I'm thinking, you asked me about my kids with the very first question. I'm thinking like, well, if it hasn't got a game attached to it, are they that interested in it, right? And so I think that there's just kind of this connection. And you look at what happened with like Super Mario Brothers and that kind of stuff, and the nostalgia that came with that movie that they kind of tapped into. That's just all the more frequent around the world building piece, right? Where people want to feel like they're part of that. And I don't know, for me, right? It's like they want to feel like they're connected to it to somehow, right? Because that's how they identify themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that there's still belief. This is why I've been thinking about the entertainment umbrella. There's still belief that there's like the us and them. There's the I make or I create or I write for traditional narrative or even docs or whatnot. And then there's and then there's games. Oh, and there's those other weird things like the VR, AR kind of experiences. And so the convergence that's happening is much more apparent. Like we have kids that are doing that. It's like, so this is why, breaking that apart and really not looking at it more exclusively, but inclusively is probably beneficial. But that has to have a seismic like change fundamentally on how we approach content, right? We have to look at it much more.
Oh, I love that, right? Because I think it is more about content plus, right? Everything, right? Because if you look at the platforms that exist today, right, it is really simply just content. That's all it is. I'm not saying that's not great. It's fine. But the expectation is it goes well beyond content, right? It's engagement, right? It's talking about experiences, to your point. Can I earn things? Can I shop things, right? Very, very few of those platforms today exist in that form, right? But that's really where they need to go, right? From my perspective, right? Because there seems to be like the omni-channel kind of experience that doesn't truly exist, right? And how can I connect gaming? That's why you see Netflix on the mobile devices have gaming on there now, right? Because it drives a lot of great data. So for me, that's how I look at it, right? It's content plus other things. Because content in itself will not drive subscriptions. How many SVODs and AVODs can you typically have? Which is why you see an explosion, right, in fast channels all over the place, right? Because they're the ones that drive the revenue, right, in terms of the...
Well, and we know this is nothing new. This has been spoken of for the last 10 years about games and its revenue versus like now box office. So,
Right, I love this. Okay, so I'm continuing to back into this conference actually. So now we've talked about the consumer experience and world building. Now, how do we build those worlds? And that comes down to now pipeline and tools and all of these things. And I know you, Rachel, and you and I, when we talk, we're like, okay, well, you don't have to just build it once and then you build something else again, but it's one asset for all kind of thing. So I'd love to hear from you guys, and even from a funding perspective, are you thinking about pipeline now when it comes to content? Like, what role does pipeline, how am I going to make all this, you know?
Rachel, do you want to go first?
I think, and you're gonna have more thoughts on this. It's about it's a kind of combination of things. Of yes, we can. How are we having a world and like world produced assets at the center? But obviously, the asset needs are going to be different depending on which thing you're creating in terms of LOD, in terms of even stylistic interpretation. But I think where I see as more of the issue when I'm working across these departments is the departments aren't even having the conversation to begin with, right? It's not even like an assumption that you're going to work together, that you're going to share assets, that you're going to have some kind of continuity of experience. I think we haven't even quite reached the point where that's.
Which is why, again, I go back to the entertainment umbrella, I'm coining it, is if there's not a basic understanding that there's a value set, or that, hey, we're all coming together, you know, maybe it's a UN, you know, there's some analogy to it. It's like, we're all coming together for the greater purpose, right? But it's problematic if different departments and groups are either budgeted or cost centered differently. And that, again, you have to start with the foundation. Then you can kind of see how exponentially are we going to ROI on it or whatnot. And what's great is technology is going to continue to evolve, so that way it will just become a thing where it's like, yeah, you probably want to do that, versus like, let me go back to like, oh, Josh, I'll send you my Word doc version 1. You send it back to me, you know, we'll keep doing that.
Oh, and then the
Versus like,
finance team doesn't want to talk about it. And then they'll have to, oh, we have our historical budgets that go into it. So it's, from the pipeline standpoint, we're always thinking about it, of what's the efficiencies that either are going to expedite the final product, or that will force the change of everyone's historical paralysis to accept change within any flow of a tech pipeline, a content pipeline, or just simple workflow pipeline.
finance pipeline is a great one too.
Yeah, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the role that the cloud's going to play in all of this. I don't know, I don't mean to pimp Azure, but but it is true that that's the other conversation going on all over town right now. Is it, you know, is it local? Is it on-prem? Is it hybrid? Is it at a data center? And that's the pipeline thing. So it's starting from that creative story, but now we're getting into.
All right, I'll touch on the cloud, but I want to say one thing first about what was just discussed over here, right? And world building. I think there's an element of world building that tends to take place, but today most people want the ability to have their own imagined world, right? So you can give me an example of what that would look like, but I really want to make it mine, right? And so I need to personalize it to some degree, right? So don't give me everything and say this is all you can work with. As a user, right, I want that control over what I want it to look like, how I want it to feel, and that's kind of a new expectation. When it comes to the pipeline, right, and the cloud, one thing I'll share is that there's always been this weird conversation. I think I probably at least once a week I have this conversation that the cloud is going to be more cost effective, right? People out there, you know, right? It's not, right? And so ultimately, yes, there's a lot of other things that the cloud provides, but that message definitely gets lost, right, in terms of where it goes, right? Scalability, reliability, security, all these other components, right? How much of the content we create gets lost to piracy and everything else that happens to that process. It's amazing. The number of assets that are seen by people that should never see them before they even see the light of day is also amazing, right? And so there are some things that the cloud provides that are fundamentally, you know, unique, right, in terms of what can be spun up super quickly, torn down, and all the rest of it, right? And those workflows that have existed that we're talking about, they haven't fundamentally changed, right? They've been very similar, right, in terms of how I create content, take it off the camera, put it on the, you know, into the cloud. Whether that's even should go to the cloud directly or not is another question, right? But ultimately, you know, I said it this morning, I'll say it again, right? I think there has been this kind of like yes, we could leverage the cloud. And I said it earlier, right? I think there's as much goes in, as much comes out, right? And so you can get killed with egress cost all over the place, right? And that's not great. And then for finance people, they're like, why is that $30,000 this month and $20,000 the following month? And it's up and down, right? And for finance people, that kills them, right? They don't understand how to deal with that. And so finding some normalcy around it is also really important. But for the first time, I would say in the workflows that we talk about, whether we're building worlds or just putting content from the camera into a backend CMS, whatever else it might be, or DAM or MAM, we have a solution where we can now automate some of those things and do it faster and cheaper than we've ever done before, and using data, to your point, to figure out what should be done with it, right? Because we all need to do these things in a much more efficient, profitable, productive way, because we all spend so much of our time just figuring out the nuts and bolts of this stuff when we want to get on and create stuff. I don't know if that's how you, but that's why I look at the pipeline, right? And the fact that if I look at the studios today and all of the bankruptcies that you went through, right? That speaks to one thing, right? Which is profitability, right? And I need to figure that out, right? How do I do that? And technology is there to differentiate the pipelines that we've been talking about, to be more efficient in that process, right? And to help us survive, right? Because I don't want to lose the art of storytelling, right? It's the most important part. So I think that's how I think about it.
That's good. Did you want to add something to that? You had that, like, when the financial word came up, you were like,
Another financial decision.
yeah.
No, like any way you look at it, it's like we're all forced into financial conversations anyway, because everyone's going to need an approval, right? And there's always going to be an ROI. There's always going to be a spend back. There's always going to be a ratio that you're going to drive towards. So, but it comes into what Simon was saying, how much data is being left untouched, of like what's forcing us to have that untouched, or why aren't we harnessing every piece of data to make the efficiencies happen? So I think that's where we're looking at every single day on touch points. Every question should have somewhat of a response. They're not all going to have answers, because that's why we're all paid. That's why we all have investors to respond to continue the obsession of how to make it done faster.
All right, I have to bring up AI, but everyone relax. I said earlier today, everyone do a shot every time you hear the word AI this weekend, and so people are hammered. But let's break apart AI and really talk about what's relevant in this. Now we're coming out of the pipeline, and it sounds like it's more about machine learning in this conversation, or leveraging that data. So can we talk a little bit about what's keeping you up at night about that, about machine learning and the appropriate application in business now for M&E? And there's lots of categories, obviously, but any thoughts on it?
It's what Simon and I were briefly chatting about before. It's like, what's keeping you up, or keeping me up, is a certain piece of technology or a group attached to that technology going to be around in 6 months? Do they actually know what they are doing, or are they just once again a group of dreamers that are latching on to what is what in some sense a buzzword? I think that's where it needs to be battle tested. There's going to be new territory that scares the pants off of everybody, but if you don't embrace it, you're going to be sitting on the side of the street, because there's so much that can be done, from whether it's the machine learning to a creative engine to a prediction to help manage that data that's not being looked at, that you would have an army of people that would take years to even think about.
I think from the producer standpoint, with AI, the catch up is really on the regulatory and the rights situation. Obviously, that's very relevant today with the guilds, and that's a whole very disruptive conversation as well, because again, as we've been saying, technology will continue moving very quickly, and are we prepared to have those conversations and go through the pieces of law and all of these things? Do we have that system in place? And no, so structurally, the plane's already the plane's gonna fly without the runway, and so I think but it is important, and I think we can't sort of ignore that piece. So there's the side of the technology piece as well as the application, and then those that are like, okay, how do I make sure all of this can be chain of title? Everything is like set to like be out for distribution any kind of distribution form.
I think related to what both of you said, what keeps me up at night is the lack of education in this space, right? I think what drives a lot of rushing into hype cycle, right? Like a certain amount of entertainment studios and brands rush into building a metaverse without knowing what it was or what they were actually trying to build. And I think we're seeing that again with AI isn't a homogenous unit. There's a lot of different types of AI. There's machine learning efficiencies that can be brought into a traditional workflow, into a virtual production workflow. There's generative kind of new models around script to screen that are not as like have a definite cap to what they can actually do, but everyone kind of is like, let's just throw more compute and we'll be able to like make a full movie using stable diffusion, right? But there's kind of a lack of knowledge of like there are actually different types of models that are behind these that cap what you can actually do with that, and there's other kind of types of AI that exist, like procedural AI systems that enable other types of kind of more interesting responsive interaction that fall more into that category of the other umbrella types of content, right? So I think there's a lack of education, and then related to that is that lack of embrace of kind of new formats of what AI is really facilitating is, yes, more efficiency within creator workflows, but also maybe letting more people be co-creators of content within the parameters of some kind of like world that you've defined. But those types of formats, we don't yet have names for them, and we are kind of not built enough of an infrastructure to actually support the consumer.
Yeah, I mean, it's only gonna if the if the entertainment umbrella doesn't get sort of like everyone holding hands, then we're gonna see a surge. I mean, we all probably thought of this already, that then the consumer creation is just gonna be hugely rapidly created, and then our choices lie with the teens of what do they want, how are they defining entertainment, and what do they want to pick and choose. And so the battleground again for ROI is even more unsustainable, which because when you put the tools into artists, creatives all over the world's hands, they'll want to create something that would like to design. And so then they get to be able to share that out.
So I will say, as I said this morning, right?
Wasn't here this morning, but
Oh, no, so I'll say. So I said the AI capabilities are there, right? And they are growing. But it's not who's got access to those capabilities, it's how you exercise them, right? Where do you put them? And I look at what's happened at Microsoft. You asked me what keeps me up at night. I got to be honest, I've never, and I've been at Microsoft and Disney and all these other places, I've never seen change in 6 months like I've seen at Microsoft in the last 6 months. Mind-blowing, right? I'm talking about changes that have appeared overnight that no one knew even existed. Fundamental like disruptions in workflows from Microsoft 365 to game-changing stuff from Dynamics and just like everywhere. It caused ripple effects across our entire organization in terms of who was spending time where and all the rest of it, right? So that was huge. I mean, you could also, 2 weeks ago, we came up with something called composable diffusion, right? Which I've talked to a few folks out here about, which is where I can take text, image, and audio together and bring it all into one piece, right? Typically, you would see like text to image or image to video, whatever else it might be. It's mind-blowing. I'm sitting there thinking, what does this do to the world of creators, right? In terms of what's out there, right? Because that didn't exist, right? And you talk about amazing creators that we work with and help and support every day, but now you're putting those tools in the hands of people that are you, me, and everybody else, right? Because now I have access to that stuff. And I would say the other piece around this is also, I'm going to come back to it only because I care deeply about the organizations that we work with and making them survive. I love the IP that they've created. And I think there's a really unique piece around the fact that for the artists and the writers and the studios, they really are intertwined, right? In the importance of the IP that they create and the worlds that they pull together, right? Because that's the fundamental difference between you, me, and everybody else and the studios and the writers, right? And we,
talent.
the talent, right? And you can't lose the art of that, right? It's what, if I talk about Avatar, what's great, mind-blowing technology, but it's all about environmentalism, right? And saving the planet and all of these other things, right? And the ideas around that. And so you want to save those things, right? Those are important. So all I'm going to say is I think technology, right, was now going exponentially fast, right, in terms of where we're going. So the control that we need to put in place, the safety and all the things that are around it are going to be important. But to not have the conversation is almost more dangerous, right? And so I do see folks put their head in the sand and go, I'm just going to wait to see how this matures.
I have an example of this. We were talking. This is like, I live over in the beach cities, right? You're on your surfboard, right? We're all on our surfboards here. The wave is coming. I want to see your arms moving. The arms need to be moving now. Otherwise, you're going to miss that wave and you're going to crash and burn, or you're going to get up on the board. And I 100% agree with you on that.
Josh, did you want to add?
No, I was going to say very similar.
I'm getting excited.
She's getting riled up.
So I wanted to add that if you guys don't have kids, get kids somewhere, because it helps.
You can have mine.
I was going to say, I'll give you 2 right now.
It helps with what we're talking about, because my daughter at 13, she showed me yesterday, she was playing with Chrome Labs music tool and she built a song. And she just found it herself and just did it. And that's what she does all night, is she's drawing, she's doing all sorts, she's discovering. So the thing about our kids is that they're growing up so differently. So I just wanted to ask you just about this generation coming up. Yeah. What are they going to do? How are they going to work and move through all of this with it changing so fast? Like, do you worry about, are your kids on Macs and does that stress you out? Or no, just kidding. Well, I don't know why I said that. It just came out. It's the end of the day. I'm sorry. But
I'm not sure how to respond to that.
I will let you know that I did just buy a PC. But anyway, but with your kids, are you guys at all worried about what happens for them? Like, what will their careers be? And if everything's changing so fast and,
Ooh.
I mean, I'm not, okay. What was the term coined, digital natives. So they are digital natives. That's where, again, we're on the surfboard. We better be paddling because it's native to them. I'm not so concerned. It's just the sandbox is being laid out. And so it's a matter of, and this is where I get excited. There's a opportunity still. There's a growth opportunity for, well, I'll say it loosely because you were defining platforms in a different way, but for platforms, because there's a need. You have a world of people who love storytelling, love artistry, love to share. That's fundamental to the upbringing of teens now. And so I think it's exciting, and I think we just need to help, allow the creatives to be creatives, and that this is the next group, and be mindful of that.
The kids and the generations will dictate what's going to happen, and every brand, every advertiser, all the dollars will follow it. And it's what everyone's chasing, is what is the right demographic to go after. And I can watch my 12-year-old teach the 5-year-old what to do, and instantly the 5-year-old can run circles around all of us of the navigation of how and where he's going to take that content.
Interactivity is, I mean, Rachel and I talked about this, but interactivity is. I mean, even on a very basic level, they require that.
I was going to say, I think it's around expectations. Yeah. I think they have vastly different expectations between one generation and the other, right, in terms of how things are expected to work. I mean, I look at my kids and they engage differently with content. Am I worried about them chatting online? You better believe I am, right, in terms of what's going on there. So I kind of block certain things so they don't do that stuff. But fundamentally, they're engaging in ways and learning in ways, but they're also the future leaders of this space, right? And so you want to help cultivate the right thinking. And so I don't know if that's necessarily a right or wrong answer to this question. I think it's more just around how do we facilitate them to engage with the content that's getting created, and finding ways for them to love what we do, right? And I think, I don't know, my house is filled with watching Bluey.
Just wait until they're mean to you all the time. Rachel, I know you're always looking at interface. So is a lot of the conversation about how the younger generations interact? I mean, is that the top of mind?
I think that's part of it, but I think it's also trying to understand how is this evolution with tech in general, right? And where does that interface with content, for example? Like, I think if we're thinking about where entertainment is and where like a functional experience is, those things aren't necessarily as far apart as they used to be, right? If we're thinking about like map-based experiences, for example, I can use Google Maps, for example, to go from point A to point B. But if I have a little bit extra time, I can be like, I have to go from point A to point B, and I have extra time. What along the way could I stop by and see, right? And it's adding something that's not purely functional to my experience. So what if you add to that, I can go, I need to go from point A to point B, but I have extra time. Is there a narrative AR activation within my way that I can see along the way, right? So there are pieces, I think, of that bleed happening more and more of like, you aren't just going and entering an entertainment experience and coming out of it. When we're talking about persistent and continuous experience, it's much more within our day to day, which is an exciting thing, but also something that we have to design that context within.
I love that. That's exactly right. I would say, I wanted to add one thing to what you said, which is when I was working on some stuff at Disney prior to leaving and going to Microsoft, one of the things we had about like the different platforms that got created was, I want you to never, ever leave my platform, right? Right? That was the thought, right? I want you to make sure I've got everything in there as far as, one show to another, but I cover everything, right?
Yeah.
Because that's how I pulled you in as a consumer, right? And that's what I think about. I think there's so much competition now in terms of the different platforms that are out there, but I mean, that's what it's really about, the world building and everything else that's there. I never want you to leave. And that's what kids, I think about, right? They're in those platforms, Minecraft, everything else. And that comes back to one fundamental thing, which is gaming. I said it once, I'll say it again, which is these platforms want these kids as quick as they can possibly get them. Because if you can get them 8, 9, 10 years old, you've got them for 10 years and you can monetize the hell out of them, right? And so I'm just giving you an idea of what these business models look like behind the scenes and why gaming gets inserted so quickly into the hands of these platforms.
I love that my daughter likes to game. I just need to transition her to also liking to take a shower. That is my mix. All right, let's just see if you guys have any questions. She's 13. I'm trying, I swear. Yes. Yeah.
Does he need a microphone?
Yeah, we can hear you.
For the sake of the argument, talking to us about generative AI is sort of preaching to the choir because everyone is a practitioner. I went to a human trafficking investigators conference about a month ago. They are very worried that the 4 or 5 photos of a human that they have to find are going to be AI generated. These are people very much on the front lines dealing with practical effects of this. And I'm curious, like, how do we, as an industry, obviously we're on the white hat side, but purely creative. Marketing photos, you can upload a T-shirt and pose somebody.
Did you see that stuff online recently where someone was posting pictures of their kids on Instagram and they were taking those pictures and using generative AI to upscale them to look like an adult, change them into a passport? Did anyone see any of that stuff? Right? It's absolutely insane, right? I took all my pictures of my kids off Instagram after that. But I think the components around safety, right, and security around those pieces, there's little to no guidance around what that looks like today, right? It's all open. We don't talk about it. And I think there needs to be more, right? Because we're so quick to use technology and we do it before we think if we should or we could. I think there's also a component to that, right? And I think we don't talk enough about that. We focus on how do we quickly apply it and use it and all the rest of it before the guardrails even come in. So it's a really good point, right? Because I think some of those things are not known. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I'm agreeing with you 100%.
Yeah, I was just saying, an image filter that makes your face prettier. That's the same effect.
Well, I happen to know that you have some coding expertise, Mitch. So, all right, another question for our thought leaders here. Anybody out there? All right, I have another question. This is a conference also where real time. Okay, I won't say that again. It's a Unreal and whatever technology gaming engine. I feel like I can't learn another platform. I've learned so many softwares in my years. I can't learn Unreal or another thing. Does everyone have to learn, these platforms right now to be, to be able to play moving forward? It feels like they're the core of everything right now. So I'm just curious what you guys think. Or are you contemplating I should learn that tool now, or? I mean, I don't know if all of you are practitioners yourselves, but and if any of you have thought about this, but do you have to learn all this stuff now?
The short answer is yes. And we get the questions every day of whether it's a municipality, a government funded play, an education format, a state agency, of how we can explain and educate faster. So if we don't have the educated teams to educate, then it's impossible to build the
It's
next.
not only M&E, it's every category, right?
It's everything. So it's just a whole supply chain meets data chain meets workflow. If you don't learn it, you don't absorb it, how are you going to explain it?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think if you look at, I don't want to bring it back to AI for just a second, but I would say that the tools and technologies on Unreal Engine, Unity and all these different component parts, right? Yes, they do take some time to learn and use, right? But what are you also seeing in tools like Autodesk with, and things like that? They are now using natural language code insertion, so you don't even need to know Python and other languages to run those things anymore. So you're also enabling more and more people to have access to that stuff, which is also great, right? So I think learning it, yes, is one, but I think you're going to see more and more applications for it, right? I mean, it's already pretty well used in a lot of different industries. So I only seeing it growing, to be perfectly
It's
honest.
getting more democratized.
Lori, if you wanted to learn, it'll just be easier.
It'll get easier.
Yes.
Yeah, because I do feel like my brain is done. It's like filled, you know what I mean? And I can't take in anything else. But Rachel, do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think part of it is the tools are becoming democratized and easier to learn, but at least knowing enough about the tool to know where it fits within the production workflow, to know what that requires then organizationally, right? Because if we're talking about moving towards that umbrella future, if we're talking about like moving towards integration within organizations, we need to be understanding the constraints that each other department is working within, right? So then even if we're working in creative, to know the difference between this ask and this ask, it seems really little to me if I'm just saying like, can this door open or can it not open? But what does that mean if I'm want that to be the case for all the doors in the game, right? Like those types of things, we need to be understanding enough of the technology to be able to talk intelligently across.
I think the advanced tools are just going to kind of blur it where it's knowledge versus proficiency. So obviously practitioners, it's like, I need to be able to work within the software package or whatnot, with new technologies and whatnot. You're basically it'll be easier for you.
I'm really lucky to spend some time with some amazing people, right? And so our CEO, Satya, will talk frequently about the fact that the age of the Wall Street software engineer is gone, right? And that sounds really harsh to say, right? But the reality is that the tools that we're talking about are going to be here for a while, and it's really going to be around what I talked about, like, I don't know whether it's multiple times today or whatever, but prompt engineering, right? And so is it going to be like an English professor is going to be more important, or English major is going to be more important than someone who knew code, right? Potentially, right? In terms of how they deploy things. So I think, you said really well that there's a lot of generative AI practitioners in here, right? And they're all trying to use it and understand how it applies, right? But it's being exercised a lot, right, already in terms of those things. And people are learning how to figure that part out. And it doesn't require the same level of technical expertise, but it does require understanding where it fits. Right, for sure.
And a creative spin. So that leads into a good sort of last conversation here, which is if you could design your next employee, the next person that you wanted to hire, and I know it could be for any position you have, but talent-wise, resource-wise, just making something up right now, but what would you want, what skills would you want them to have? What do you think they need to come to the table with, knowing about all these trends that are coming down the table?
I'm going to say one word: flexibility. Primarily because I don't know anybody in this industry that doesn't do 10 different things at the same time, right? And so understanding how to do those things and bring in the flexibility and also practicing that to some degree and being okay with it is really what drives value to me, right? When I think about the people that I work with, because this job demands a certain level of thought leadership about how things are going to get done, where you're going to do them, decisions you're going to make about profit, cost, technology, and all the rest of it, right? And it's really demanding, right? And we're not sitting here with big teams behind us, right? Sometimes, right? They're small. So flexibility to me is what I look for every time, right? Certainly professionalism for sure, all those other things, but flexibility.
And just grit, just enough grit to have the endless pursuit of perfection, knowing that perfection, that goal line is always going to be moved. It comes into then having the flexibility, the adaptive nature to pull up the bootstraps and get to work and not be afraid of it.
I'd add curiosity, because in the going down the line, things are going to change. So you need to be flexible. You need to have grit. Like, don't give up. But that ties hand in hand with, I think, curiosity. And then on the artist side, I still feel very much, even with AI and whatnot and what you can get, fundamentally you still need to understand like what is great story. So like my husband's a screenwriter, so he understands that well. Now there are tools that obviously will help along the way, and then also just in terms of like if you're creating something in terms of like composition or whatever, you still have to have an opinion. You still have to have an idea of what looks good, how it's like lighting, composition, frame, all of those things still apply. You might not, it's again, I was saying before, knowledge or proficiency. It's like you need to have that versus maybe actually doing it yourself. Where when, way back when I was in VFX, it's like lighters lit and they needed to know how to do it and work within the box.
That's great, Rachel. Take us home, baby. Take us home.
I think related to flexibility, we talk a lot about hard skills and soft skills, but I think there's a whole other category of context skills, right? Knowing where you're working within an organization, within an industry, within the tool set, and what you're working towards, and how to navigate those skills, I think is really important, because you might have very similar kind of asks coming from a product department versus a marketing department versus a content department, and being able to distinguish those things and what you have to build and what's required of you is a context skill to know what those needs are. And related to that, I think working with AI, yes, there's, prompt engineering, there are all these new tools kind of evolving, but I think the really important skill there is information architecture, being able to know, going into talking to an engine, how are you formatting what you actually want to come out of it? So you're not just like reading the output and being like, this is great. It's being more rigorous about, these are the things I want out of this. This is how I want to work within systems, all of those types of things.
Can I say one thing?
I wish you would.
Because I missed something when we were talking about our kids and what they were doing. And I think there's one thing that, we sit behind screens all day long, and everything that you just said resonated with me, right? It's about how to have a conversation, right? It's about having an intelligent discussion or be open to having a conversation. And those things are kind of lost, right? I think, and you can be careful not to lose them, right? Because we can have a great conversation up here, but how often does that really occur? And so I think just for me, it's, I think when I look at an employee, how do you communicate, right? And how do you share? And so it's really fundamentally important. My wife would tell me I'm a terrible communicator. I beg to differ, but just as far as communication and open conversation, I think is really important.
It's great. That's a great note to end this on. So let's have a big hand for our thought leaders here. Rachel, Christina, Josh, and Simon. Thank you so much. So everybody